front of us, and we'll potentially, fall back to old patterns that didn't serve us very well. So the idea here is just for some time for reflection and improvement. So if we look at my marker, if we look at Darwin, who of course is the one that talked a lot about evolution and evolving, he talked about this idea of the survival of the fittest. And really he sees, and in his studies, it was those organisms, animals that could adapt best to their environment. So the environment's been changing quite a bit. I mean, I've been working in the AEC industry for 18 years, but it's actually more like 50 something because my dad was an architect. So and he had his own small firm. So when I look at the changes that he went through and the ups and downs of the industry, it's constantly changing. And as I come in to the industry from a different point of view, there's some things that have evolved and there's some things that haven't, and maybe we need to look at that. And one of the things that comes to mind to me, I was in human resources working for a national architecture firm for a number of years. And what I noticed is anytime there was a dip in the market and things got tough, we lost a certain demographic of people. And mostly they were our 10 to 15 year. And we kept having this gap of that expertise. And people were leaving at that time, as we looked at it, is they were at the point in their career to say, am I making enough money for the hours that I'm working? And I have children, I have mouths to feed. And then people started having questions. So that's something that as we look at certainly what's been forced upon us, but also how we're behaving and managing our business, there's some legacy things that we need to look at. And then there's also some of the things we've certainly learned. I think there's some wonderful things we've learned in the last couple of months to look at. So obvious issues you're going to find as you go through this process that you've been needing to work on at your firm. And then there's maybe some opportunities that are being presented that we want to explore. So when we look at planning considerations, there's 3 areas that I want us to look at. And let me kind of go to those. As you're looking through, again, a lot of folks talked about operations a little bit. And as I go in and talk to firms, especially as they're growing and evolving, they have a vast amount of information that they haven't really collected and sorted through to make a determination. That would certainly fall under the operations side of it, and even market focus. But when you look at market focus, what we're talking about there is what are the markets that you're in, the type of work that you're doing, and what is the size of project, this type of client. Where I've seen some of the most successful firms, one of the things that they had in common is they had a diverse market focus. So in some markets are hit harder in these times and others aren't. And they made a conscientious effort to make sure they were getting into both of those. So when you look at your market focus, again, the size of project, the type of project, and the type of client you want to work with. That's one area that needs to be considered as you're looking at evolving. Operations is the second part. I explained that a little bit on the poll. So how are you doing in business development? I have a lot of succession planning that's happening in organizations where principals are being promoted. And this handoff of business development and market focus is something that they're needing to really concentrate in. They're struggling with a little bit, but they need to stop and take the time to really work on that piece of it to bring these new people up that are going to be out there marketing for their firm. We've certainly learned about technology in the last couple of months. That's something to look at. Your human resources side, you've been thrust into this. What can we do and can't we do during an epidemic with benefits and sick leave and policies. So lots of operation pieces that have been popping up certainly recently. But again, if you look at your past, what are the areas that you really want to work on? And then the people side. So what's the people makeup of your group? How are you managing? I'm real big on this idea of collective power. And that's will be sort of the second part, is understanding human behavior. Is really important to understand that unleashing of the collective power. What I find is we've got a lot of firm leadership in here. And what I know is you guys are always very optimistic and about how things are being run and how things are going. But when I talk to staff, they say it could be a whole lot better. It isn't that great. Here are some things that we need. So the higher up you are, the more you're going to miss out on some of those people opportunities that are out there. So that's why it's going to be important as we go forward to get some feedback from them. So one of the tools that I use is grading. And this you can do certainly amongst your leadership. You can certainly do it with everyone. But I always like to ask the question, how do you think you're doing today? And even this is even pre-pandemic, I would say, is if you had to grade how you were doing on your business side, the market, the focus, and where you were spending your time and energy, and how that was going, how would you grade it? A, B, C, D, or F? Operations, how were things going there? Deliverables or billables time, and getting invoices back, and keeping up with technology and training folks, A, B, C, D, F, and then the people side of it. So how are we doing in creating this collective powerhouse that we have, and bringing people together and coming back up with great design and solutions and managing projects really well, A, B, C, D, F. And what I find is when you go through this, first of all, people are always a little nervous. There's a lot of pluses and minuses in there. They don't want to sort of, well, it's not quite a D, can I put a C minus on it? And that's fine too. But I think what it finds, certainly as a leader in your organization, you're going to see how people are thinking about that. And it's a great way to start a conversation. So that's a tool I would say, as you're looking at this evolution, is to just get a grade from folks. And certainly, people are nervous during this time. That's one thing we'll talk about. People are very vulnerable. So anything you can do through a Survey Monkey or something that's anonymous is great. But this is a great way for you to really get an idea of and I will tell you, when I'm in a group and do this, people lean forward and then they're like, okay, I'm not the only one that feels that way. And again, it's a great way to start a conversation. Everyone understands grades. So I love the idea of, cleaning house. So I kind of had this idea of kind of as you go through a closet, keep, toss, give away. Change typically isn't in there, but we're going to go through this idea. It's a great way people are sort of familiar with this. So as you go through this with your group, it's a great way to sort of think through this. So I put some questions together, and I'm happy to share this presentation with you also. If you want to use this for your group going forward, the questions are there. But before we go through those four, here's something in giving feedback. I used the iceberg scenario, and in an iceberg, typically if you ask someone, how are you doing? I'm fine. That's a general answer that you get. So you're doing fine. Yeah, health is good. I haven't gained too much weight during this pandemic. You keep asking questions and you get to something really concrete. Another example will be if someone says one of the areas that might be keep our culture. That's great, but it's a general response. It doesn't tell you anything. Well, what is it about our culture that you want to keep? Well, we do a good job collaborating. Well, tell me more about that. When we have a new project come on, we all get together and we talk through it and gather ideas. Okay, tell me. And you keep kind of going till they stop, and you really get to the foundation of, if you want to keep the culture and you don't know precisely what that is, you may be focusing on the wrong things. So I always say, as you're going through this process, is to keep going. If you get too general, you're not going to have much to do. It's going to be very difficult to do something with it because it's, again, too much for interpretation. So as you go through this process, think of that. Keep digging in. So think the question is, what sets us apart as a firm, and how does it work to our advantage? I've worked with some firms that saw something as what sets them apart, but when we talk about how does that benefit them, either getting and retaining folks, or certainly getting work, because you can get and retain folks really great, but if you're not getting work in and getting a message that's clear and getting out there and getting contacts with potential clients, you can have a greatest culture in the world, but you're not going to last. So part of it is what sets us apart and how does it work to our advantage. And there can be parts that can be, we work well together. We're very focused. You know, one of the things I talk to firms about is what's your win rate? And a lot of firms feel like 25, I hear a lot from them about 25%, especially for, well, medium to large. And I would say, the firms that I know that do really well are certainly in the 30s, 40s, 50s. I know one that does 70 because they're very, very focused on what they do. So part of it is really kind of looking at how successful are we in our time and effort, what is that bringing to us? But what do you want to keep as a firm? And I would say go through all three of those. What are we doing well on the business side and operations and the people? But it'll be interesting for you to hear from folks what they want to keep. The other part of that is people don't, when I work with firms, they don't leverage this as much. I had a firm that I worked with of 8 people, and they spoke, I think, 13 different languages. So they came from different parts of the world. They were in the Midwest, so that was really rare, I will tell you, on the coast, as you all have, that's not as unordinary, but that's something they could really leverage. They see things, they come from different density of cities and different ways of doing things around the world, and that's something they can really leverage. We see things that you could miss and use that. So again, dig into what you want to keep. What's the diamond that sets you apart? But it has to be something that clients want to, you know, that a part of it is you could be great, but does anyone know about you, and are you getting the work that you want? So what do you want to keep? The second part is what do you want to toss? What isn't serving us well? What do we need to stop doing? Is there something that you have a low return on investment? Something that dilutes your focus? And are there any unintended results to something? I had a firm I worked with who did religious, and they liked that, but when we looked at their strategy going forward, they really needed, and they were growing to the size, they needed larger projects. So part of that was, they loved that was in their heart. They weren't making much money off of it. So how much effort do they need? They certainly had locally some recognition of it, but is that something they should be spending a lot of time in, or are there other markets that are coming up that make more sense to spend time on? So what isn't serving us well that we need to stop doing? That could be, we don't need to all be in the office. You know, this work from home thing, especially when I look at a city like LA with the traffic that you have, we look at what the environment, how the environment's benefited from this. Is there anything we need to stop doing that we say, and can we do something differently? Maybe it's 2 days a week you're in, and those are very focused on what the team's doing together during those times. So what do we need to toss? What's not serving us well? And then what do we need to give away? And my intent in this is, we do the Habitat for Humanity, we do some of those things, but I think the thing that a lot of us have been struck with is there's universal issues out there. And when I look at the healthcare trying to, even from logistics, trying to solve some problems, there's people in other industries that could really help out with that. You guys are design thinkers. You think problem solving through design. I don't know if you're familiar with the organization IDEO, and they actually helped invent the first mouse in design for computer. They're very well regarded out of Chicago. And they've really ended up teaching design thinking to corporations around the world. So is there a universal issue that you can partner with an organization to come in and say, we're design thinkers, let us help you think through ideas, because you're going to help them see things they haven't seen. So I would say in the giveaway, really think bigger, because I think we're needing that in the world today. So as design thinkers, where can you step in? And really making a commitment to that. And then change. So I'm going to take you through a process where we're getting feedback from folks and ideas. And the idea is to get feedback on these stops, you know, this toss, keep, invest in, and change. And then see what themes are out there. I did this process. If you were all together, I would use Post-it notes and have one idea per Post-it note. I think you can do that probably virtually, but with all the ideas that are out there, get those. I did this with a group of about 100 people, and we did individual focus groups. When we brought them all together, we had, I think there were 8 big flip charts with probably 30 or 40 Post-it notes on each one, that people could visually see, this is our feedback. We gave feedback. So what we did, they could certainly go and read through that, but what we did was we looked at the themes that really popped up. There will be outliers, but there will be some real strong themes that come out that your organization will want to work on. And then I always start with foundational. So what do you need, what builds on something? So foundational, we need to get this in order to be able to do these other things. So you always start with foundational and get that in order, and then work toward more the aspirational. Where strategic plans and project plans and all fall apart is you try to do too much. So I would say it's, you know, what can you, I wouldn't even pick more than a couple of things, maybe one under each period, because otherwise you're not going to be able to work on stuff. And I'll give you an idea of, there was a firm I worked with, and they were generalists. They did a lot of different things, but when I looked at their culture and what they were all about, collaboration was really big, really, really big, and community collaboration. So they were very good at community groups and pulling information and facilitating that. And they were just masterful at it. But it's not something that they were really pushing as much. And they had a nice portfolio that was building on community recreation. So one of the things we talked about was establishing some expertise, building a brand and a buzz around something. And they had several things they could have done, but if they tried to do 2 or 3 of those, none of them would have gotten done. So we started with one, and we said, we're going to take this one and we're going to build the best practices around it. So where can we get innovative in developing your expertise? The idea being that you create this buzz, people in that area, in that market know about you and start, as they're talking to other folks, they come to you versus you having to come to them as much. So anyway, I think the idea is, you know, what are the themes? Foundationally, where do you need to start? Certainly keeping the aspirational pieces in there too. But a lot of times you need a foundation, some things in place to be able to do the aspirations. So don't try to bite off too much. And then determine your change commitments. Again, under the business operations and people. One at the most. And I'm a huge believer that this isn't owned by the leaders, that they are, I call them sponsors. They help set the stage. And actually I have a form I could send you if you're interested in how to set it up. But it's the next few layers down. I mean, maybe even not even the second. You don't want to give it to your busiest people. And we typically, the other thing I would say is have people volunteer to do it. The most brilliant answers or solutions have come from doing this. One of the firms in LA that I worked with, they had we had a group working on the people side was something they wanted to focus on, and they had sort of a people vision. And they hadn't been versed on doing visions and creating visions. And I will tell you, it's the most powerful vision statement I've ever heard. And it started off with "We Are Family," which you wouldn't think from some of these younger generations that that would be what they said. And it was sort of a play on word. It was actually had been a family-run firm for a long time, so they wanted to play on that. But it was theirs, and they owned it, and it was brilliant. And there was a lot of things that they could do with this vision. So the other thing I would say on this is, once you kind of determine what the change commitments are, get a few layers down involved in putting this together. The thing with, as a leader, is you drive how they're going to participate or not. So if you can step out of that, it frees them up. So looking at the change. So to set this up a little bit is the human behavior piece of it. And this is just huge. I've alluded to a few things as I've talked, but I'm real interested. There's an organization, I'm real interested in the brain and how we react and respond. And certainly being in the HR side, and then being as a consultant and watching people and how they're moving and reacting, and why, and what shut something down and what opened it up. And you have to really understand the brain. So I'm not a brain scientist, but I act like I am sometimes. Ask my husband. But there's an organization called the Neuro Leadership Institute, and they're doing wonderful things, and they have great webinars, the Neuro Leadership Institute. And it's very easy to, I mean, it's all connected to businesses and people and the brain and why we do what we do. So for instance, they talk about, while we want to think of a job as, you know, I go in, I do my work, I do it well, and I get paid accordingly. Our brain just doesn't see it that way. The brain sees the workplace first and foremost as a social system. So even things like, if you bring someone new into an organization, people are going to be saying, am I gaining ground? Am I losing ground? Certainly as we're working from home and virtual, if someone's heard something and others haven't, that starts, can impact the social system. We want to be a part of a tribe. We are a part of a tribe, and we want to be recognized for what we can, and valued for what we can contribute to that tribe. So as much as we want to think of people just doing the work, first and foremost, they're reacting and responding to the social system. So for example, when they hooked up people with neurons and did different activities, this idea of being excluded has this in the same part of the brain, same region as physical pain. So the sort of reaction as a blow to the head, they said. So feeling excluded, they talk about being ostracized, feels same feeling in the body as hunger. So as we think through, and I think, again, people are feeling very vulnerable right now. The more we can do to sort of bring people together is important, and the way we do it and the timing of how we do it is important too. Certainly during, I did a webinar on just the communicating at work at home and being thoughtful of that. If you're interested in that, let me know. But it's really having this cadence of communication, and who needs to know, you know, a leader who has a team reporting to them needs to know some change before the team does. So things like that, but it's very much a part of who we are. We operate by the threat reward response, and little things like, I canceled a meeting, a one-on-one meeting, and the leader says, well, Joe's so busy, he's not going to mind because he's got an extra hour. And what we find is it's a threat response with something more important to me, certainly if it happens more than once. So little things can trigger the threat response. Again, someone hears something before someone else does. What we know about the threat response is it lingers. The reward response is a dopamine hit, and when it goes up and down pretty quickly, but the threat response lingers and impacts us deeper. So when we look at the threat and reward response, well, let's look at the threat. You know, people are feeling threatened right now, and it impacts how we're retaining information. It suppresses ideas. It's sort of that shutdown of the system that happens. So when I'm in a threat, it's hard to think straight in situations. So the more we can be open and talk through things. And certainly this idea of getting their feedback on the firm and this idea of moving us forward, that's something they can have control of. And the more control you have, it's sort of that reward response. Looking at my notes here. So threat reward response, just know you need, the more organized you are and the more you, certainly if you're going to put them through this exercise, is letting them know how this is going to go in the process, then that's going to help out too. I mentioned this, threat response is triggered in social situations, intense and longer lasting. So where we want to get to, and you all are at different places in your organization on social capital, but that's kind of what we want to build. And this kind of exercise can really help build social capital in your organization. And it's this idea of reliance and interdependency on each other. So it's being able to brainstorm and debate and bring up ideas and really get, as Margaret Heffernan, she's got a great TEDx called Forget the Pecking Order at Work. And she talks about building this idea of social capital. If you haven't seen that TEDx, it's wonderful. And it's Heffernan, H-E-F-F-E-R-N-A-N. It's brilliant. Everyone should watch it. But again, this idea of critical thinking and challenging and testing and building a environment where that can happen. Let me go back to that real quick. The other is, when she talks about this social capital, the other opposite is groupthink. And that's something where, and it's going to be harder as people are away, but the groupthink is, I'm not going to say anything because I don't know if it'll be accepted, or groupthink can be a lot of people who think just alike, and you need someone, in looking at these solutions, maybe at some different points of view. I'll end this by saying we either live with intention or we exist by default. And during these days, we can be in the default mode and just trying to pick up pieces as they go, or we can be much more intentional. But I will tell you, your team's needing intention. If you haven't put a pretty robust, because California is going to be, I'm in the Midwest here, and we started back slowly this week, and you all have some time to go. If you haven't really worked on that communication piece and push and pull and having some regular communication is something definitely to be more intentional about. So I'll take some questions.
Thank you so much, Jane. Yeah, we would love to hear from you guys. Any questions that you have today, please either use the raised hand button or use the chat box. And Greg and Carlo, I always lean on you to get this portion started.
I'll do one, and it's probably a softball for you, Jane. But by the way, thank you for kind of sharing this process and kind of a way of perhaps thinking how to strengthen teams and kind of look towards the future, I guess, and with them. And I guess my question is what do you find is the biggest obstacle, being in a firm right now that has just gone through an entire strategic plan overhaul, a big firm. We had some pretty interesting conversations, and they're very frank during the process. But what do you think is the biggest obstacle, I guess, for an organization that is embarking on this process of kind of understanding their values and kind of their path?
For individually or as an entire firm?
No, I mean, I think as I guess as a firm, I guess it depends on the size of the firm, but in general, what do you find as the biggest obstacle to kind of making progress?
Yeah, I think first of all, the strategic plan should be that guiding light. You may need to tweak it and work on it. One of the firms that I just finished a strategic plan with, they made the decision to keep moving forward with it. So they had some initiatives and some groups, and that was a big deal for them because there was unknown. They've had some slowdown. They've had some virtual project interviews, which has been really interesting for them to go through, but I think people are going to want to know what's going on with that plan. If you've communicated it to everyone, how does that go forward? I also had a woman who was working on a bunch of initiatives, and she was on the accounting side of a very large international architecture firm. And she had lost some, anyway, she, was going to keep going with those initiatives. And I said, put them on hold for 2 months. She couldn't, so in her case, it didn't make sense for what she was working on. There was some triage that needed to be happening. So I think part of it is, where do you go forward and where do you triage? It depends on the situation of your group and your firm. But, people want normal, but they also want it straight. And so I think part of it is to say, here's where we are on this. We're going to, just let them know the state of it and what you've decided to do or not to do. People just want to know that instead of nothing. Yeah.
Jane, I had a question for you. One of the things I'm interested in is clearly these are different circumstances that we're working and living in. So how do we as team leaders readdress the way we measure our own success and the success of our teams? Do you have any suggestions?
I think your own success, right now it's, your team's needing a lot from you. So for instance, even here, when there's going to be some folks coming back, are the folks staying home for many reasons concerned about their future there and how that's going to be perceived? So I think in letting them know and really hearing from them, I think that's a big piece of it, because you alone have a lot of control over that and how that can go. And I think it's, as a leadership team, you also all have to be very clear on when are we going to communicate if things do go south. And people need to know, here's how we're basing our decisions in the weeks ahead. And here's where we are right now. They need to know it's not a Pollyanna-ish, and it's not the sky's falling in, but they need to know how you're making decisions and what you're talking about and how you're moving forward. Because certainly there's some project teams are impacted more because a project went away. And I don't know the circumstances on all of yours, but if you don't want them talking amongst themselves and creating panic, they're looking for you to guide them through this. So I would say that part of it. The client part of it's a different animal too. I think I've seen some firms get really creative on, in fact, one is doing some great wayfinding resources for clients on, how to manage the flow of people throughout their organization and helping to plan that. So they've grasped a few things, not only helping them design it, but actually putting the design and having these things printed, and they're beautiful. And they work internationally, so they're having people tap in there. I just find I get concerned when leaders are just wanting to, again, let's just get back to normal, and when they've got people who are really struggling. So I think you got to be focusing on the folks right now. Certainly keeping in touch with your clients, but I think that's a big responsibility for a leader right now.
We have a good question from Michael Strogoff. Michael, do you want to address the group, or do you want me to see your question? We'd love to hear from you. Michael. Okay, I'm just gonna,
I think
there you are. We hear you. Nice to hear your voice.
And thank you very much. It's a really insightful presentation. So my question is, if a firm knows that a declining backlog and limited cash is going to require significant furloughs or layoffs, how transparent should the leaders be with their staff? And when do you kind of balance anxieties with transparency?
What I would say is, we are juggling projects and monitoring, and those may, I don't think, so I think what they need to know is you will have at least this much notice if you're going to be impacted by this, you know. So it's, we're managing, we're looking, we're you know, part of it is how much, you talked about backlog a little bit too, but it's also, again, how much cash in the till, because there's certainly things that would be nice for a firm to work on and get some things done during this time. But I think it's saying we're looking at stuff, we are being impacted. I mean, they know if a project's been on hold because the team knows. So our commitment to you is, if you're going to be impacted, here's what we're going to do for you. We're going to give you this much notice. We're going to have this resource for you. I think there is a little bit of a balance. I mean, if you know that in a month you're out of money and there's no projects that you're waiting to win, then I would tell them, you know, if it's a foregone conclusion, then let them know. But if there's, you know, if you're waiting to hear on some stuff, but if there's nothing, there's nothing. So I think it's just letting them know. And I think part of it is talking to the group as a whole and then reaching out to folks individually to answer questions, or at least have your project managers available to answer questions. I've been in both scenarios, certainly as an HR person, and sometimes we had to move work from one location to the other, depending on, again, the talent that we had and expertise. So part of it's how they're gonna, you know, you're making that decision too. But, you know, if you don't want to panic them unnecessarily, but you don't want to catch them off guard.
Thank you. I guess on that note, I sort of have a similar question, and we talked you and I talked about it a little bit before. When you are strategizing, you know, what you need to toss, and you can't put that lightly these days. I guess if you can elaborate a little bit more on that, also when it comes to, you know, how much, a lot of times we don't have time to strategize, you know, what we really need to toss in this moment, and how we can kind of do that a little bit quicker, but also strategically if we need to.
Okay, I'm going to throw one thing in before I answer that, before I forget. The other thing is, whoever your healthcare provider is, and you have an EAP, people need to come to terms themselves with some of the fear and things that are out there. So if you could get your EAP person or someone that says, you know, can talk to them a little bit about stress and anxiety, but have a resource for them to handle. I hear people saying, I don't want to, my husband's peeking around the corner outside to see if he can come in. Do I tell my firm I'm scared to death? But part of what they need to do is they need someone to help them with their personal struggles that are going on. So that's one thing I will say. I think the toss thing is, you know, we fall in love with certain initiatives and projects. I was working with a firm, and it was a bigger firm, and the HR group was, I mean, there was this huge initiative they were doing. The leader loved it, and it was taking millions of dollars and all sorts of time. And he ended up moving on for one reason or another, and no one missed it. So part of it is, you know, what are you doing that no one would miss if it was gone? The other is, what are you in love with, but you're not making money off of it. It's not profitable. It's taking a lot of time. It's maybe some risk. I mean, we're looking at risk these days so much with situations. So what do we sort of need to look at? The firm I talked about that was growing, it didn't make sense for them to do all these small things. And they would say, well, we're doing it because then it could lead to something else. But the reality is it wasn't leading to something else. So I think the toss part of it can be, there will be some obvious things, and then maybe some things to go, if this is what we're aspiring to and this is what we're working on, then this isn't serving us very well. But I always say be careful. I was talking to some HR training people, And I said, you know, you're teaching these classes. If it went away tomorrow, would anyone care? So who's coming back and wanting more of this versus you forcing them to do that? I mean, one of the things I have kind of a pet peeve was 360 feedback, which a lot of firms have decided to do. And it takes a considerable amount of time and effort. And is it really fair to put someone's performance on a peer to sort of give that feedback? So part of it is what's not serving us. We're spending a lot of time and effort, but is it where we should be focused? Should we be focused someplace else? You only have so much time and energy, and what's taking up your time. And I say that with the toss, I would say for leaders here is, you know, trying to do things you're not that good at, you know, trying to be that HR person and you're really not, or the marketing branding and it's not a strength of yours, or you're doing the billing and the, you know, get help so you can, I can't tell you how many leaders could be out business developing and creating those contacts, but they're strapped doing things that really would be better served for someone else to do. They could do it in a fraction of the time and it would be 10 times better. So I think that's another thing as far as tossing. If you have too many hats on, and I think it's a real problem in the industry until you get really pretty big, of firm leaders trying to wear all these hats.
Thank you. I think it's good advice even for home and the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, we'd love to hear from more of you. Greg, if you have anything else to add right now or any other questions.
Nope, no, I'm good right now.
I was going to say we'd get you on the road home to eat dinner, but you all are home.
Walk, yeah.
I did fix that polling question, so if we want to try for your fourth question again.
Yeah, that's
okay.
most helpful.
Okay. All right, there we go. So can everybody see this poll? There we go. All right, so I'm going to close it and, oh, now more people are coming. Okay, I'm going to close it in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, I would say with the change process, kind of in conclusion, a lot of times people give feedback and they don't know what has ever happened to it. I was talking to a firm and I had done some preliminary work and getting some feedback from folks and came with my recommendations. And I said, here's what I suggest you do. And here's the process. And I said, but if you don't have the time and energy for it, don't start it, because you're going to be worse off than you are right now, because you got their hopes up and expectations and then you just let it drop. So, you know, one of the things with this change process is, number one, helping people understand, here's why we're doing it. Here's an opportunity that, you know, we're being forced in this situation. It's a time of great reflection and we want to reflect. Now, I would say if you just did your strategic plan, you just did your, you know, I don't know if the timing, if you've gone through a huge process of strategic plan, I don't know, that could be confusing for them. I thought of that as I was saying this, but to say, here's why we're doing it. We've got some time, we've had time to reflect, and we'd like to dig into this a little bit. And then here's the process we're going to go through. And here's, and making sure when people give feedback that, again, they can see all that feedback and get some of those themes. That always is surprising for them to see, to be fully transparent on that. Here's feedback and here are the themes. And again, we only have so much time and energy. And so here's a logical place for us to start. Here's the process. We're going to go through that. So letting them know the whole way how this is working and why it's being done is an important part of the change process. So sometimes, we drop bits and pieces of this. We ask for feedback. We put a plan in. We don't tell them what we thought. We put a plan together. We don't follow up and let them know how it's going. So part of this is really being thoughtful and intentional in doing this. But I will tell you, going through the whole thing from intern, when I did the one firm, I said, don't have time, we shouldn't do it. We did it, and we got feedback from interns to the chairman of the board. And it was fascinating, the information we got, especially when it came to technology and people close to it, that the other firm leaders became much more aware of things they hadn't been aware of before. I think that's a big gap that's out there too, is what's being sold and what it takes to put things together from a technological standpoint. So anyway, I think it can open up some great areas of communication, but you just want to be really transparent on why you're doing it, how you're going to go about it, and giving them feedback and updates. So thank you for your time. God bless all of you, my goodness. I know this is a really difficult time. I've been pleased with a lot of firms I'm working with that not everything's dropped off. And I know that, timing is everything on that. I think people have been more optimistic, and it's probably not that way everywhere, but that's been a relief versus things I saw in 2008.
Thank you, Jane. We'll hand it off to Greg.
Sure. Listen, thanks, Jane. It's good. I think all of us at some point in our career, or maybe more than once, are going to go through a series of these kind of portals into the next stage of our either work or personal life and things like that. So it's important to kind of stay organized and think about how you want to end up on the other side. So thank you for that. On the screen, I think Corinne's got some upcoming events. These are also on our website as well, so you can refer to that for more specific information. But I guess with that, I think that kind of closes our town hall for today. And again, thank you to all our members and non-members that were joining us today. If you guys have questions or suggestions for future town halls, please reach out to the chapter office. You can reach out to Corinne directly, or Carlo, I'm sure, and go from there.
And if you want any of the resources I've talked about, just send me an email, Jane at janewaltonconsulting.com, and I'm happy to share any of this with you.